In this video, I will be discussing the tragic case of Sandra Birchmore, who was a 23-year-old pregnant woman found dead in her apartment in Canton, Massachusetts on February 4th of 2021, which was 3 days after she was allegedly killed by a man who had known her for almost a decade. Now, the very fact that I just said Canton, Massachusetts may ring a bell for you. There are a lot of similarities and crossovers between this case and the Karen Reed case. But before I go further, I want to do a quick introduction. My name's Carolyn, and I'm a lawyer who takes an investigative approach in uncovering the invisible forces that control our world. This includes diving into true crime, ethics, philosophy, and psychology. These are all deeply intertwined and influence society as we know it. Plus, I have a passion for finding the truth and fighting for justice. Now, this specific case popped up on my radar because a subscriber of mine mentioned it in one of my Karen Reed videos, and the secrecy, manipulation, and abuse of authority made me want to cover it. This case is, like I said, tragic and involves alleged grooming, covered up police misconduct, botched investigations, cheating, and much more. And I believe that Sandra Birchmore and her story deserve and need as much attention as the Karen Reed case got. Before I get into it, I also want to say there's going to be a quick wardrobe change about, a quarter of the way through or so, and that's because I had IT issues, classic, and I had to film this on 2 different days, so just keep that in mind. That's why I'll look different. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Much like the Reed case, this involves the Canton Police Department. It occurred in Canton. The FBI is also involved. Both cases have alleged police misconduct. Both involve alleged mismanagement of investigation, and specific officers show up in both of these cases. That being said, in the Birchmore case, we have evidence of almost a decade of police abuse and misconduct that is just coming to light now because the victim of that abuse and misconduct was found dead in her apartment in Canton. The abuse occurred under the Stoughton Police Department, but since she was found dead in Canton, the alleged mismanagement of the investigation was done by the Canton Police Department. Before we discuss what happened on February 1st of 2021, though, which is the day she died, we first must go back almost a decade in time, because that is what led up to this tragic day. Sandra Birchmore endured a lot of pain in her early life. She never knew her biological father, her stepfather died when she was very young, and she lost her grandmother, mother, and aunt all within a 3-year time period. Nonetheless, she was described as a vibrant person who took Brazilian jiu-jitsu and cardio kickboxing lessons starting at the young age of 11. She also developed a passion for and interest in law enforcement, and as a young preteen, around 12 to 13 years old, she joined the Stoughton Police Explorers Program. The Police Explorers Program is a nationwide program headed by the Boy Scouts, and its purpose is to introduce children interested in law enforcement to the world of law enforcement. Through that program, she met William and Matthew Farwell, who were twin brothers and involved in the program in a variety of ways, as well as Robert Devine, who was the program's leader and a mentor to the Farwell brothers. Sandra was a young and impressionable girl who trusted authority, had no strong father figures in her life, and was interested in law enforcement, which made her an easy target of exploitation and abuse while in this program. Per evidence of communication between Sandra and Matthew online, the alleged grooming began in 2012, and Matthew began assaulting her that same year, which is when she was 15 and he was 27. The age of consent in Massachusetts is 16, which means his conduct was a crime, hence me calling it an assault. And outside the legality of it, she was still a child who was the victim of grooming and manipulation by multiple adult men, which that's something we'll get back to later. Sandra and Matthew's sexual relationship continued throughout her time in the Explorers program. Throughout his marriage, which began in 2013, and allegedly up until her death. Matthew's and Sandra's communication via text messages in 2019 and 2020 showed frequent discussions of their sexual encounters, and it showed that he enjoyed violence. According to the federal prosecutors on the case, Matthew also told Sandra to delete those messages from her phone and Facebook, likely to avoid incriminating himself. In these same text messages, he admitted to assaulting her when she was 15 and expressed an interest in wanting to engage in sexual relations with her at an even younger age if he had known she wanted to do that. In October of 2020, Sandra told Matthew she wanted a child, and they reached an agreement, where Sandra said she'd keep silent about Matthew's criminal acts and extramarital affair if he impregnated her. She then found out she was pregnant sometime around December of 2020 and told Matthew via text message. According to the prosecution, he responded very poorly, later becoming physically violent with Sandra, and according to what she told multiple friends, Matthew had pushed and shoved her, grabbed objects from her hands, and had put her in a chokehold. A month later, in January of 2021, one of Sandra's friends called Stoughton Police Department to report the relationship between Sandra and Matthew. Matthew found out and apparently became physically violent with Sandra once again. On January 24th to 26th of 2021, Matthew asked Sandra for a key to her Canton apartment, which was odd, given the fact that previously he had been reluctant to have that in his possession as proof of their relationship. He also asked Sandra to keep it a secret that she had given him a key. According to federal investigators, once given access to her apartment, Matthew began casing it. They know this because Sandra had noticed, found the behavior concerning, and mentioned it to multiple friends. Now, most of what I described was covered or discovered by the federal investigators after her death. But in addition to the FBI doing an investigation, the Stoughton Police Department also did an internal probe on Sandra's death starting in April of 2022 and generated an internal affairs report with findings that both support what the federal prosecutors and the FBI are alleging and that expose more abuse. This report found that Matthew Farwell's brother William, as well as Robert Devine, also allegedly had inappropriate relationships with Sandra. And although it wasn't detailed in that specific report, Police Chief Donna McNamara said a fourth man, who at the time this report was published was an officer with a Massachusetts agency, also took advantage of Sandra. In addition, a fifth man, a military recruiter, had inappropriate communications with her. In that same internal affairs report, a past participant in the Explorers program said they saw inappropriate behavior by Devine and the Farwell brothers, which included hugging, kissing, and inappropriate contact in a closet. And apparently they had made statements like, "Come back and see me when you turn 18. On top of all of this, we know that William Farwell exchanged explicit messages and photos with Sandra while he was on duty, and allegedly he tried to introduce Sandra to other men. William currently does not face any criminal charges in the case and argues that his sexual relationship with Sandra went on for about 2 years and it occurred when she was an adult. Now, while the relationship with Sandra and Matthew Farwell continued up until her death, or allegedly, Matthew previously claimed to law enforcement that he had been trying to distance himself from her and that he hadn't seen her since October of 2020, which was about 4 months before her death. We know that this is false, although he was likely trying to do this to avoid being connected to her pregnancy. When she died, she was 3 months pregnant and had claimed Matthew was the father, and there is proof that they had sexual encounters leading up to her death. And according to text messages, it does not seem he refuted the claim that he was the father, although later after her death, he argued it was not his child. Then, interestingly enough, in a bombshell report that came out in June of 2025, this most recent June, we actually found out that Matthew Farwell was not the father of the child. Nonetheless, they were still sexually involved. Whether this information will change anything is yet to be determined, but as a former federal prosecutor said, he doesn't have to be the father, he just has to think he's the father. That's what gives him the motive to be homicidal. Now, leading up to her death, Sandra was very excited about her pregnancy. She had planned a pregnancy announcement for Valentine's Day, she planned a gender reveal event, and she was telling all her friends all about it. But according to text messages, Matthew did not feel the same way. And that makes a lot of sense, seeing as he was married with 2 children and had a third one on the way. Fiery text messages between the two showed that Sandra wanted him to be present for her delivery, put his name on the birth certificate, and have some involvement in the child's life. She said, and I quote, "Your kid should matter." And he responded, "You are truly the worst person on the face of the earth." In another text exchange about the pregnancy, Matthew accused her of threatening him. He said, "Now you've got me, and if I didn't go and give you what you wanted, you would ruin me." He probably meant go, not do. That's why I added that in there. And yeah, if it came out that he had a baby with another woman while he was married with kids, and that he engaged in sex with a minor, it would definitely ruin him. But I don't think that's solely Sandra's fault, is it? It was his choice to engage in an extramarital affair. And given the history of grooming and abuse, I would say it wasn't Sandra's fault at all. Grooming a minor is exploitation of that child, and the blame lies with the adult who did it, not with the child. The day of her death, February 1st, Matthew was the last person to see Sandra alive. On that day, he texted Sandra at 9:08 p.m., wanting to know if he could come by for a second. 2 minutes later, she texted him back that the door would be open. Then, 4 minutes after that, security footage showed Matthew wearing a hoodie and a medical face mask entering Sandra's building. And I want to point out that Matthew was wearing a medical face mask. It was odd, because apparently he was well known as being resistant to COVID-19 mask mandates. Now, her cell phone cataloged her final steps at 9:40 p.m., and 3 minutes later, at 9:43 p.m., cameras recorded Matthew exiting the building. He was likely headed to the hospital because his wife was giving birth to his third child there, who was born hours after Matthew allegedly killed Sandra. On the day Sandra's body was found, which was February 4th, her colleagues at Sharon Public Schools had alerted the police because she had missed work for multiple days. And now here's where the Canton Police Department comes in, because she died in Canton, and that department was in charge of the investigation. Following the call by her colleagues, Canton police officers checked her apartment. The first cop to respond to Sandra's home was Canton Police Sergeant Michael Lank, who, if you were watching the Karen Reed trial, you know was very involved in that investigation. The responding officers of the Canton Police Department and the state troopers assigned to the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office ruled it as immediately, before her body was even autopsied by a state medical examiner. But the state medical examiner, Dr. Maria Capo-Martinez, later agreed with that assessment, and to this day, Sandra's death certificate still reads that she took her own life. Now, this is an important point that we will come back to later, because the federal government disagrees. And yes, also like the Karen Reed trial, the FBI is now heavily involved in this case. But that conversation comes later because we really need to understand the order of events here. Okay, so Sandra's estate brought a wrongful death lawsuit against Stoughton officials, which argues that Sandra's alleged was the culmination of a near-decade-long scheme of grooming and repeated assault from a young age by certain members of the Stoughton police. Specifically, the civil suit named Devine and the Farwell brothers, accusing them of grooming and assaulting her, as well as the town of Stoughton and the Stoughton Police Department. The state also hired an expert to determine the cause of death, and he ruled that the death may have been a homicide at the hands of Matthew Farwell. We later found out that this medical examiner was Dr. Michael Baden, who's actually a famous forensic pathologist known for his work in high-profile cases, such as the reinvestigations of the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. He was also the host of the HBO series Autopsy, and he's actually somewhat known for his controversial opinions, including making 2 claims in the O.J. Simpson case that he later disowned. Now, Dr. Michael Baden pointed out that Sandra had a fractured bone in her neck, which is the type of injury that is rarely, if at all, found in self-imposed hangings. But this injury does occur in half of homicidal strangulations of women. In addition, he pointed out that the ligature was entangled in Sandra's hair, which he argues occurred because there was resistance during the homicide. The FBI also hired their own medical examiner, Dr. William Smock, who, like Dr. Michael Baden, also disagrees with Dr. Maria Capo-Martinez that Sandra took her own life. He believes it was a homicide, pointing to the same evidence that Dr. Michael Baden did, and adding some additional evidence to support his conclusion. Weeks after Sandra died, relatives found a necklace on her bedroom floor. It was broken along the chain, not the clasp, and had a clump of hair stuck in it. This very necklace was actually documented in crime scene photos, but state troopers made no mention of it in any of their reports. What's also very weird is that in the photos, the necklace was actually hanging from Sandra's neck. But given the fact that it was later found on the bedroom floor implies that the investigators practically tossed it aside and just forgot about it. This further points to bad handling of this entire investigation, which isn't something new in the true crime world, nor is it new in Canton. Now, Dr. Smock, after analyzing this, claimed that the state of the necklace was consistent with a struggle. He also highlighted that there was a pattern imprint on her right upper chest consistent with blunt force trauma from an assault, and abrasions on her nose consistent with suffocation. There's also circumstantial evidence that supports the argument it was a homicide. Matthew requested the keys to Sandra's apartment 1 week before she died, and we know he previously was very resistant to having a key to her place. In addition, someone reported their relationship to the Stoughton Police Department, and he found out, which gives him a potential motive to kill her. He didn't want anyone knowing they were together. He feared she would tell more friends, and this would blow up in his face. Then we have evidence of Sandra's phone indicating that her last movements occurred while Matthew was still in her apartment the night she died. We also have evidence that Matthew, after her death, searched on Google if Celebrite, a tool used by forensic examiners to extract data from a cell, could recover deleted messages. Specifically, he searched "can delete iMessage by recovered high Celebrite." I think he meant bye when he said hi, although that's a bit redundant, but you get the picture. He also searched for and deleted "Can you revoke consent in Massachusetts?" Matthew also had a history of violent fantasies and actions. According to text messages between him and Sandra, he would physically abuse Sandra, and according to Sandra's own journal entries, he would punish her with violent sexual acts if she made bad grades, slept with other people, etc. And this punishment started as early as 2013 and continued into 2020. There's also evidence that supports the argument that she did not take her own life. She planned a pregnancy announcement for Valentine's Day, a gender reveal event. She made an OBGYN appointment for February 10th, had ordered baby items, conducted Google searches related to her pregnancy and child-rearing decisions, planned for newborn baby photos, arranged for someone to watch her 2 cats around her due date, etc. The list really goes on. She was making plans to have a future. With all of that in mind, federal court documents allege Matthew strangled Sandra and staged the crime scene to make it look like she took her life. Matthew Farwell was arrested in August of 2024 and has been charged with killing Sandra Birchmore to prevent her from communicating information about his commission or possible commission of federal crimes, and if convicted, faces life in prison and potentially the death penalty. So you're probably wondering, what's the controversy here? How can anyone think that Sandra took her own life? Well, let's take a look at the evidence on the other side. The only medical examiner to examine her body was Dr. Maria Capo Martinez, the state medical examiner who believes she took her own life, and she refuses to change the death certificate to this day. Sandra's body was cremated after her autopsy, so the other medical examiners only saw photos. In addition, State Trooper Matthew Dunn found no indications of physical abuse or bruising, swelling, external trauma, or markings suggesting a struggle. And Sandra's toxicology report found she was taking sertraline, which is a prescription psychotropic medication usually taken for depression. On top of that, in May of 2020, she was temporarily involuntarily hospitalized because she had gotten in a fight with a family member who called the police and reported that Sandra was going to hurt herself. That being said, at the hospital, she was evaluated and was not seen as a risk to herself. It also should be considered that Sandra endured significant mental and emotional problems, as stated in the civil suit, which included losing her stepfather, grandmother, mother, and aunt as a child, never having met her father, and the alleged continual grooming and abuse from at least 3 members of the Stoughton Police Department. Whether you find this evidence of her taking her own life convincing or not, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But all of this leaves us in an interesting situation. One medical examiner claims she took her life, whereas 2 others disagree and argue she was strangled by Matthew Farwell, who deliberately set the stage post-death to make it look like she took her own life. But the state medical examiner is staunch in her belief that she, Sandra, took her own life, that it was not a homicide, and to this day, that's what the death certificate says. This is setting us up for a battle between the experts. And not only that, but we also once again are looking at Massachusetts in an allegedly botched investigation involving the Canton Police Department and alleged police misconduct within the ranks of various law enforcement departments in the state of Massachusetts. So, where do you stand on this case? We have some people arguing she took her own life, while others are positive that Matthew Farwell killed her. And then, no matter which side you fall on, we still have a lot of police abuse and misconduct as well as mismanagement of investigation. At the end of the day, this is a tragic case, and the fact that it took almost 10 years for this kind of abuse to come to light is a painful reality that we have to come to terms with. I mentioned Karen Reed at the beginning of this episode, and that's because I believe we need to bring that same kind of attention from that case to this case, because Sandra's story is heartbreaking and involves collusion, abuse, and misconduct. All things that must be accounted for. So, with all of that, please let me know what you think, and thank you for watching. I'll see you guys soon.